So this lightning talk is going to be about the social science behind conversation, which theories work best with software, how those frameworks implement concepts that are familiar to conversation analysis, and what's currently lacking in chatbot development when it comes to some of these theories. So who am I and why should you even bother listening to me? Well, I've been a software engineer for over 20 years. I've experience in various industries and I'm currently focused on medical education. And one of the areas in which I'm highly involved is with Microsoft's bot framework. So let's talk about conversational software. And the first thing I want to point out is that you're thinking about chatbots all wrong, or at least a lot of people are thinking about chatbots all wrong. So look at your phone and tell me how many chatbot applications are actually installed. How many of them you're actually using? People think of chatbots in a very specific way. And it's not about chatbots, it's actually about conversational software. So now the purpose of this talk, what I hope to actually convey is an understanding of the structure of conversation from a social science perspective. This gives us a depth of knowledge when it comes to the human behavior and turn-based communication. So this knowledge is directly applicable not only to chatbots, but dialogue design, and it's appropriate for the construction and understanding of conversational frameworks. Now, when we define conversation, I mean, what does it actually mean to be talking about talking, right? We're not talking about linguistics, we're not talking about language acquisition, we're not even talking about language understanding. Conversation can best be defined as any form of communication between two or more participants that consists of an exchange of thoughts, feelings, information, ideas, any sort of expressions, and most commonly but not always is presented in a question-answer pair, a sequence of turn-based events. So when we talk about conversation, what types of conversation are there? Well, there are different things. There's storytelling, there's narratives, there's interviews, there's therapy sessions, there's assessments, there's complaints, and all of these things are incorporated into the way that we talk with one another, the way that we converse in pairs. They are types of conversation within the framework of how we interact with one another. And they each have their own nuance, but by and large, they are all captured by a turn-based sequence. So when we're talking about talking, we want to look at certain things. Conversation analysis is concerned with process, function, and behavior. It includes physical interactions and observations and categories. It excludes consciousness, and it's structured as turns, sequences, repairs, and actions. The only other framework we could potentially use would be discourse analysis. Now, discourse analysis has a broader and less specific framework than conversational software actually needs. Now, what are the parts of conversation analysis? We actually talked a little bit about this earlier. We're talking about turns, sequences, which is extremely important. When we talk about sequences, they're adjacency pairs. So when we look at the bot framework or we look at other sorts of chatbot frameworks, BotKit and Rasa, a lot of times they talk about dialogues, and the dialogues have questions and answer pairs. These are actually adjacency pairs. These are sequences that move you through a conversation. And there are other things such as sequence expansion, preference organization, and then more advanced concepts in conversation analysis include repairs and actions. So sequence expansion in particular, to understand kind of that, one of the concepts is silence. There's a concept of silence within the way we do a sequence expansion during an exchange. Silence is usually inferred by some sort of body language, but with a chatbot, we don't have that body language. So a lot of times silence is inferred by typing. So a lot of chatbot frameworks actually offer a way for you to give an indicator that the bot is thinking by sending a typing indicator, and that typing indicator allows us to recognize silence as a sequence expansion inside of conversation analysis. Now let's take a look at some of these examples. So what you're seeing here is a prototype chatbot framework, and the design of this was specifically meant to be as close to conversation analysis as possible. Here the bot listens, and you can see that directly under it we immediately get into the turn context. And so we get the initial turn and we pass in the conversation. This is the state of the current conversation that you're in. So it's going to understand the history of the conversation. Once we have that turn, we can then perform actions on it. If it's a message, we can then go ahead and do something. If it's over, we exit. If it's not over, we continue the dialogue that we're currently having, or we allow the bot to actually say something using a function like bot.say. So dialogues, we actually call this a dialogue, but in reality, it's a sequence. It's a sequence of adjacency pairs. You can see that we do the same thing here where we use ask. So it's dialogue.ask, and then we finalize it with say. We're trying to maintain that conversational flow and the semantics of conversation. Inside of these .asks, you can actually see that we have the statement that's being asked, or the question that's being asked, a way to remember the answer. So we're passing in an object that just says, remember this as the name or the nickname. And then we also can pass in a list of choices before we finalize the dialogue. So this is very much like conversation flow. So what's missing from all of this? Well, we didn't talk about conversation repair, and there are two types, self-repair and when another repairs you. And conversation repair is when there's a problem or a misunderstanding within the conversation, and we seek to move backwards in order to correct ourselves or for another to correct us in order to reset the conversation to eliminate the period of misunderstanding. And it's very hard in current conversational software to actually recognize when an error has occurred and move back to repair it. We can always tell when the bot hasn't given us the information that we want, and the end user can actually make a statement, that is what I wanted, and we can try to guess where we need to go back to. But a lot of software struggles in the fluidity of conversation repair in order to avoid it from being jarring and having to actually start over or start significantly further back in order to correct it. Other areas that are missing are things like action formation. So we do have openings and closings when it comes to conversational software, but we don't have other action formations. And we're also missing things like intersubjectivity. A lot of personal communication actually relies on intersubjectivity as context to the conversation. So there are certain known things, key indicators, when you are having a conversation with an individual where you're able to infer meaning from the conversation without an explicit call out to that meaning. And right now we're just not advanced in things like natural language understanding or even dialogue management to be able to infer context based on pre-existing relationships. I'm actually going to be doing a series of blog posts and tutorial videos on conversation analysis. If you go to YouTube, search for CodePunk, that's where I'll be putting up a lot of these videos. So thank you.